Hello everyone, welcome back to Grapple Theory. My name's Jamie. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our newest interview. Now, I should say that the introduction I'm doing right now was filmed after the interview that you're just about to see was done, hence why my hair might look a little bit different. But nevertheless, we are delighted to be joined by a near 20-year veteran of the wrestling business, a deathmatch lover, and one of the first people to start a deathmatch company in Australia. All the way from Melbourne, he's one of the co-founders of Deathmatch Downunder. It's Joel Bateman. Joel, thanks so much for joining us here on Grapple Theory. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Good.
It's been a massive week because we're in lockdown again. So
yeah,
we had to cancel a show, and then we've had to kind of bankroll 2 shows in a one day for August. So I've just gotten off the booking call for that. Quickly had some dinner, and now I'm here.
Busy, very busy. I was going to ask, how is the lockdown situation over there? Because I've seen a few just Aussie wrestlers tweet about it. It seems pretty hectic.
State by state, to be honest. Like Melbourne, where I live, I live in Victoria. We're doing okay. Ooh, that smells great. I usually do the can open on the recording. It just means I got to get another beer. But yeah, so we're getting 10, 12 new cases a day, all traceable, but they extended the lockdown. It was meant to end yesterday, and they've pushed it out for another week, which is fine. But Sydney, which is the next state above where we are, is completely fucked. They've got 110 new cases a day.
Oh.
Doesn't look like they'll be out of lockdown until September.
Damn,
and then Adelaide's in lockdown as well. So yeah, we're very gun shy. Like Victoria, the state I'm in, was locked down for 10 out of the 12 months for last year. We were locked down from March pretty much till Christmas. So we're very, when we start to see cases pop up, we all just have this really big trauma response. Go, oh fuck, we're gonna get locked down again. So
crazy. I was going to ask actually about that with Deathmatch. Obviously, you guys set up, relatively recently, about a year ago, and had your first event at the start of the year. How was that, setting up a wrestling promotion in the midst of a global pandemic?
Well, it was. Are we recording?
Sorry. Yeah. We're recording. Yeah.
Cool. No worries. No, that's delicious. So the original plan was we were going to launch in May of 2020. So we had an American wrestler by the name of Casanova Valentine come over and do some no-ring death matches here, as kind of like a launch party for the promotion, and then we were going to kick off in May. But what ended up happening, obviously, the third of the 3 events we had Cassia for actually got cancelled due to lockdown.
Right.
So the pandemic was just starting to hit here in March. And then we went into lockdown, like I said, pretty much all the way through to Christmas. So we had the framework and we knew what we wanted to do with the company. But I tell everybody we had kind of the blessing of the pandemic, where we were able to stop, because while we were in lockdown for 7 or 8 months, the Black Lives Matter movement happened, speaking out happened. So it made us kind of take a step back and look at ourselves internally as a wrestling company and going, if we're starting in this brand new era of wrestling, this post Black Lives Matter, post speaking out era of wrestling, we need to be a wrestling company that respects and reflects that. So we essentially knocked the whole thing down and started building it from the ground up all over again.
Yeah, and I got that's obviously so important. There are a couple of companies over here who have just set up and are having their first shows now. First shows ever after lockdown and stuff. And I mean, like you say, BLM and speaking out are 2 huge things apart from COVID that really rocked the wrestling world. How important is it, not just for yourself, not just for those new companies, for companies across the world that these things are taken into account and wrestling doesn't go back to how it was pre-COVID?
It's do or die for the industry. I think it's the old school and all kind of that, but that we saw it with the Me Too movement in television and cinema. That shit doesn't fly anymore. So we are very proud of the steps that we put in place, and the teams that we have in our company. If we're a brand new company, we're doing something so risque as death matches. Why can't the normal companies be doing this too? We're happy to be the first. We never said we're going to get it right the first time, but we're happy to be the company that does it first. And hopefully, over the next weeks, months, years, other companies start following suit.
And how has the reception been for you guys, in Melbourne, where you're based? How has the reception been for for the company just starting out? Because you've had, I think, something like 10, 11 shows now.
Yeah, 10, 11 shows in 6 months, which is stupid. But I don't think we could have done Deathmatch Downunder in any other city but Melbourne. Melbourne's like for sure the most progressive city in Australia. Very big arts city, very big live music city, very big sporting city. So the reception's been great. I mean, we haven't put up one poster. You know what I mean? It's all been social media and word of mouth, and a little bit of podcasts and stuff, obviously, like so. So doing that, and then we've sold most of our events now. I wish I could say all of them, but the doubleheader tournament weekend didn't sell out quite. But every other show we've done has sold out at least a couple of days in advance. So we're drawing 350 to these shows,
Amazing.
Which is a good house. So I couldn't be happier with the reception we're getting. A lot of times, I won't go as far as saying imposter syndrome, but sometimes, you do got to kind of, blink the sweat out of your eyes and splash some water in your face and go, holy shit, this is actually working. This crazy idea of having a deathmatch-centric wrestling company with something that's also so inclusive and progressive that's never been done before seems to be working. So.
Amazing. And I was going to say, what made you want to set it up, in Australia? Because apart from the fact that it's your homeland, I guess people think deathmatch. You mentioned deathmatch, and people think probably GCW because of Nick Gage. But what about deathmatch? It drew you to it and made you want to set up a company in Australia.
So I've been wrestling myself for 18 years now. But when I broke in, I found deathmatch really early. And was always, fascinated and enthralled by it. And when I got into Australian wrestling, a lot of the companies here were doing like a pseudo ECW, FMW kind of style, like a hardcore deathmatchy at the top of the cards. That was what all the main events and stuff like that. So from a very, very young age, it was kind of ingrained in me that that's the cool style. And then as I've grown and obviously learned more about pro wrestling, I've always wanted to do death matches, always done them. I had my first death match at 15. It's something that I've always wanted to do, but now being so far into my career, it was kind of time for me to put my money where my mouth is. I finished up at the previous promotion. They had a change in management, and I went, all right, I'll go out with that as well. And then it was, time to put up or shut up. And I went, well, if I'm going to put up, I want to do the type of shows that, myself and the rest of the management team want to do, which was death matches.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that as well, in terms of, your passion for it and starting so young as well. I mean, what is it about the deathmatch, both for you as a wrestler and as a fan of wrestling, that is so intriguing, enthralling?
In a business that is all make-believe, it is the closest thing to real. That's one aspect of it. But it's a live-action horror movie, stunt show. It's a car accident directly in front of your eyes. There's something so quixotic about it when I bring people from whether it's my 9-to-5 job or friends or family to a show for the first time, and I love watching their reaction the first time a light tube's popped, because the mood in the room just changes. Even if you've seen 100 death matches, every time you hear that light tube pop, the mood in the room changes. And, the gore is obviously a big part of it, but it's just so dramatic. Like, wrestling obviously is a device to tell stories, and I think deathmatch wrestling is one of the best devices to be able to tell stories, because you have consequences for your actions, and immediate visual consequences for your actions to help tell whatever story you are trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say that as well. So am I to think that, like you say, friends or people from work who you take to deathmatch, or to any other promotion, is a deathmatch like one of the first things they're experiencing in wrestling? Because it's a strong way to say it.
So in a previous life, I used to be a travel agent, and I actually had some clients that were in Japan with me at the same time. I was there for a holiday, and they were there as well. And I said, hey, come, I'll chat you tickets to the wrestling. And we went and checked out a Big Japan show. And it was my first Big Japan show, but it was also their first wrestling show. The main event was like a 300 light tube match, something crazy like that. And they went, this is amazing. I love this. And then came to they still come to the local wrestling here in Melbourne, once we all returned home from that trip. So, yeah, a lot of the thing is, especially here in Melbourne, there's not a great deal of kids going to the wrestling anymore.
Mm.
A lot of the independents here are young adult, young professionals, even a little bit older, like your Attitude Era kids have grown up and have money and aren't afraid of being passionate about something that, outside of our little bubble seems to be a little bit nerdy and a little bit dorky. But whether it's our promotion here in Melbourne or other promotions, both in Melbourne and around Australia, it's the product is swaying more mature because there's less kids coming to the shows. It's all just passionate adults who are happy to, leave their problems on the outside for a couple of hours.
Which is fantastic as well. And what is the just generally in Australia? What's the indie scene like compared to I guess the amount of people that would watch like WWE or things like that?
Oh, night and day. Like WWE is available on basic cable here, and on some free-to-air channels in certain formats. But we've had a really thriving indie scene. We're like every other indie scene, whether it be the UK or Mexico or the US or Canada or Japan. The difference is we don't have that upper echelon promotion. So, for example, in the US, obviously you've got AEW and WWE, NXT UK, and then Progress for a time. Obviously, in the UK, Mexico's got AAA, CMLL, so on and so forth. You have these upper echelon promotions. Where here, because we're so isolated, we're like 2 flights in a day away from yourself in the UK. Los Angeles is 15 hours direct. Tokyo is 10 hours direct. So we're 10 hours away from any other big wrestling hotbeds. So we're so isolated. Like for a long time, we didn't even get imports in. We all just kind of worked it out off the old guys from the 70s and the 80s, and then just watched TV and went, I think that's how that works. And, we did have some imports. And they go, what the fuck are you doing? But we have a thriving indie scene here that has such a depth of talent. I mean, every major organization in the world at the moment has an Australian towards the top.
Yeah.
So that gives you an idea of kind of the quality that we have here. I'd say maybe there'd be close to 50 promotions in the country. Because the other thing is, like, we are so isolated even as a country, but state to state and city to city. So, like, whereabouts are you in the UK?
I'm in London, so capital.
Okay. So, how far is like Wales is what?
Wales from us, like driving probably about 4 or 5 hours.
Exactly, and that's another fucking country. The nearest major city for me is either 8 hours west or 10 hours north.
Yeah. Crazy.
And otherwise, it's just country towns. So that it's tough for things like road trips and stuff like that to build like a dense scene. So it's almost back to the territories where like certain areas of the metropolitan area is taken by certain promotions, and we all kind of try to respect it. Like there's a couple of companies out east. There's one far east out in the country. There's 2 or 3 that run around the middle of Melbourne, a couple that run in the north, and one that ones in the west. So we have like 10 independent companies, or I'd have to sit down and count them, but about 10 independent companies here in a city of 5 million people.
Which is crazy. And I was going to lead on to that because I think the way I equate it is I don't know if you're like a soccer fan or anything like that. But like in terms of like any sport really, in terms of like developing talent, it seems like Australia is a country wrestling wise that goes so under the radar in terms of the talent that has come out of the country and is still there in the country that comes through. You only got to look at like WWE or even in the UK on the Indies or NXT UK, the amount of like Australia and New Zealand talent that has come through that scene. Which is incredible.
As well, like Aussie Open are the ones that like we were really lucky to have Aussie Open for a couple of dates with DMDU, top 5 tag team on the planet. You know what I mean? Like they're at the top of every card in the UK and every card in Japan and the cards in the US and wherever they go, they're at the tippy top. We have a real knack for developing talent here, and it's because of, like I said, the unique circumstances. So wrestling had its heyday here in the 70s. Jim Barnett, who was a promoter for WCW at the time, had World Championship Wrestling Australia, and it was an NWA affiliate. So you had like Ric Flair, Andre, and then a bunch of local stars that are still household names in Australia almost 50 years later. You talk to anyone, over the age of about 50 here in Australia, and they talk about Mauro Milano and Ron Miller and Spiros Arion. They were the 3 baby faces on TV every week. And they were selling out, these house shows they were doing a weekly loop, and they just smashed this loop out and sold 5,000 tickets every week. It came off TV in the late 70s, and then there was just like this chug along of the indies through the 80s and the mid 90s, and they were fucking terrible because it's guys in their 50s and 60s working a 70s style in front of a crowd that wants to see the Attitude Era. And then it was about 98, 99 where, this new crop of guys came through and turned it back up and started doing, what you'd call a modern independent style for that time. And that's when you started to see the houses go back up. And that was kind of the big, it was an okay house at the time.
Yeah, because I still think the Aussie scene is really underrated in terms of, people know the likes of, just that whole, generally Aussie New Zealand scene, the likes of, Kokai, Tony Storm, Rhea Ripley, Aussie Open, Charlie Evans, all that, from UK indies or from, big companies. They'll know all these names. And yet I still feel like the Aussie scene is really underrated in terms of people paying attention to it from overseas.
Accessibility is the big one, to be completely honest with you. One, the time difference doesn't help. So going live isn't necessarily practical. You can empathize being in the UK and having to get up in the middle of the night to watch WWE live. Very much the same thing here. Like, so for us to catch WWE live, it's Monday morning. It is here. So like WrestleMania, everyone in the business takes a day off work. So, which is why we're so happy that AEW is doing Saturday pay-per-views, because it's Sunday morning here. You don't have to miss work. But to go live for the United States, for it to be practical, we'd have to go on at like 1 a.m.
Yeah, which
isn't practical
it's just
for
not
a
doable,
domestic
is it?
audience.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned Aussie Open there. I was gonna lead on to that because you mentioned at the very start like how COVID was in a way setting up a little bit of a blessing for you guys in terms of setting up the company. Was it also a blessing in terms of the fact that, say, without that, maybe you wouldn't have had, say, Aussie Open or Charlie Evans coming home to Australia for the pandemic and getting them on your shows?
Most definitely. Bittersweet because these guys are my friends. Chasing their dreams and getting very, very close to them. But it's nice to have your mates home for a spell as well. Like, I've known Kyle since he started. I've known Davis 10 plus years. Charlie since they started as well. So being able to have world-class talent, because we're really good at getting the mold in terms of almost like a finishing school or putting polish on. It's really good to see talent go overseas and pick that up. But what I'm loving the most now is talent are going overseas, getting this polish, but then coming back and realizing that we do have a thriving independent scene here that now everyone is looking at due to the success of the people that have came before them. Your Buddy Murphys and Tony Storm, Rhea Ripley, Australian Suicide, etc. But being able to have these friends come home, on a personal level, it's amazing. On a professional level, we are so lucky, and we are very thankful every time we can use them on our shows, because we know that we've all kind of said quietly, the next time all these guys leave, they're not coming back.
I guess it must be a really nice validating feeling setting up this new company, having these names and putting on these shows, like you say, selling out most of your shows. It must be really nice and validating knowing that, there was definitely a market for this thing that you were hoping there would be a market for.
Yeah, 100%, because a lot of the wrestling that fans are exposed to here is WWE. So a lot of the independents are just trying to do that WWE style and not necessarily embrace being an independent and doing the stuff that makes us different as opposed to the stuff that makes us all the same, which is a lot of what we try and do with DMDU. Like, yes, we have a Japanese booking structure where we try not to do scrambles and stuff like that, but, we're intergender from day one, gender neutral from day one. We do put on a lot of death matches. We put on some ridiculous matches, quite frankly, in terms of just, hey, Caveman Ugg is 130 kilos, Jessica Troy is 50 kilos and really good technically. Screw it, go have a match. And they'll come to the booking team and go, what do you want for the match? It's a fucking good match. It'll be lovely. And that's all the direction they get. And they get to go and be themselves. And we're not overproducing it. So then to be able to mix that in with genuinely world-class talent like Aussie Open and Charlie Evans and Robbie Eagles and stuff like that, it gives us an air of legitimacy straight off the bat. And it also translates to there's now more fans here than ever, I think, flying the flag for, them when they go back overseas. Like the support that we've all got behind Robbie for this weekend, going for the junior title in the Tokyo Dome. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all feel like we're Team Robbie Eagles. because whether it's, as a promoter, as a wrestler, as a friend, or a fan, we all feel like in some way we're connected to Robbie, and he's off doing it for all of us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned, obviously we're based here in the UK. So anyone who watches us from the UK will know of Aussie Open, of Charlie Evans from the British Indies. Who say people who have travelled less from the Aussie scene, who have wrestled for you guys, are the ones that you should say that people should be keeping an eye out for, the ones to watch that you think are coming up and will be the next big ones?
We'll say that there's two kind of columns of thought there. There's the column of thought of the people that I do believe will go internationally and get signed and make $1 million. And then there's the wrestlers who have families and are a little bit older, and for whatever reason, that chance maybe to go internationally and pick up a contract is passed. That doesn't demean their work any less, and that's why we're so happy to kind of have that crop of independent talent. The first person that came to mind when you asked me that question is Richie Taylor. He's the DMDU heavyweight champion. Richie's north of 30 now, been wrestling for well over a decade. Hands down one of the best wrestlers I've ever been in the ring with, and has had matches that have literally brought me to tears. Like he gets it better than most, and could pick up, and if he had the opportunity to spend some time overseas, yeah, I reckon he'd get picked up in a heartbeat, and he'd be off and he'd be gone. Mad Dog is another one for those who like death matches. Mad Dog is the most off the grid person I've ever met in my life. He's only just stopped using a flip phone. It's 2021. He's tough man to get a hold of, but as such, he doesn't have a social media presence, which means a lot of his work goes unnoticed. But he's done 10 plus tours of Japan with Freedoms and Big Japan. Excuse me. And is, up there as one of the best deathmatch wrestlers in the world. Like he's had amazing matches with Takeda, amazing matches with Kasai. And it's awesome now, again, with our deal with IWTV to provide a platform for these guys. And then the other one's Royce Chambers as well. He had a DDT tour that got cut short due to the pandemic. The sky's the limit for that guy. He's top 5 high flyers on the planet. More people need to watch Royce Chambers now, so that when he gets signed and makes $1 million, everyone can go, it was cool, I knew him then.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to flip it on you and ask you the opposite. From let's say just unsigned talent, not the AEW guys, not WWE guys, not stuff like that, but indie wrestlers who aren't in Australia. If let's say money's not an object, let's say the travel's not an object, let's say COVID's not a thing, in a year, 2 years, hopefully. Who are the wrestlers now that you'd love to get in to DMDU?
Everyone. I've been really blessed in my career. I've got a lot of friends all around the world, but and that's the thing. Like I go, what's good for business, and then what makes me happy to be able to see my friends in person. Like Alex Colon is number one. He's the best deathmatch wrestler on the planet. Happens to be one of my best friends to boot. So Alex is number one. Drew Parker from the UK, who lives in Japan. I want him here immediately. I want Matt Tremont here and Jeff Cannonball. I would love, Nick Gage, Chris Dickinson, Ali Catch, Effie. Like, we have a really amazing relationship with Game Changer in the US, and a couple other US promotions as well. I can't wait to be able to cash in on those. And then in the UK, like Cara Noir, obviously your scene's in a bit of a rebuilding phase at the moment, but Cara Noir, Big Joe, Clint Margera, guys like that, like the OGs of UK deathmatch. It'd be super cool to have here as well. Jonathan Gresham, huge fan of. Lee Moriarty, like Jonathan Gresham and Richie Taylor is my current dream match, and I don't care how much money we will inevitably have to spend, it will happen one way or another.
As we mentioned before, you've had 10, 11 shows now. Can you pick any specific, I know it must be tough, this is going to be a tough one, but can you pick any specific moments that you'd highlight as, your favourites from that brief run so far?
Again, there's moments as a promoter and then moments as a performer. I really enjoyed my match with Charlie Evans. Like that goes up there as like my favorite match of all time that I've had in my entire career, just because Charlie and I are such good friends, and we wanted to do that match for so long, and it ended up, exceeding even our lofty expectations of what we thought it was going to be. So it was really cool to have that match, but obviously the crowning of the two champions that we've got at the moment. So the finals of the tag team title tournament, Aisha and Murdoch, who are both going back to the ones to watch, Asia and Murdoch are both not even 20 yet. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're so young and they're so goddamn talented. They'll both get contracts and go away at some point. So enjoy them while you can. And then Richie winning that 2-day 16-person tournament. A war of attrition, a genuine war of attrition. Like, got rocked on night one. Was hurting come the final and just sucked it up and went out and put on like the most emotional performance. You look at all the ringside crew and the people seconding in that main event, when they're all in tears by the finish, just because there's a big element of realism in that because of how hard everybody had worked over the 2 days and how close knit we are as a locker room. There was no hiding how beaten up everybody was and how tired everybody was and how passionate everybody was. That match goes up, the Charlie Evans Richie Taylor match goes up there as probably my favorite match I've ever seen live.
Leading forward now, obviously you've got the 2 shows in August. What is next for you guys in terms of how you can evolve and build on what you've already started?
We have to be flexible and we have to be malleable. We kind of just have to play the cards that are dealt to us. So the 2 shows we have coming up in August, our July show that was meant to happen this Saturday just gone, that got postponed due to a COVID lockdown. We're now going to run that as the matinee show before the Deathmatch tournament in August. So we have to put on a full-scale, full-price show, and then in 3 hours turn it around and put on the first ever Deathmatch tournament in Australia. And there are some people doing double duty on that show, and they're going to be sore as hell. And we have a show on the Friday night doing no ring death matches as well. So there's going to be some really beaten up humans by the end of that Saturday. But we wouldn't have it any other way. Do you know what I mean? Like, we looked at potentially doing a couple of shows internationally at the start of 2022. Like I said, due to the vaccine rollout here in Australia being bungled by an idiot prime minister, that's unlikely to happen in the very near future. But things like we have, because like I said, the big issue with people not following the Australian indies is exposure. We don't all have streaming deals. There are more Australian companies on Fight now than ever, which is excellent. We are so lucky to have IWTV as a partner. They've been amazing since day one. They took us on sight unseen. And we like to think that, we're holding up our end of the bargain. They're definitely holding up theirs. But, that gives us a wider fan base. So, whether we're taking the shows to regional Victoria. We had a show last week up in Ballarat, which is about an hour and a half out of metropolitan Melbourne, which was an amazing atmosphere, like a small, intimate show in a country town. Was really, really cool. Whether we take it interstate, whether we still look at international, bigger venues, different venues, like this is the pipe dream for everyone in management and everyone in the company. So usually if someone has a stupid idea, we always say, please float the stupid ideas, because 9 times out of 10, somehow we'll make it happen. And lo and behold, like, over the course of the promotion, both in the lead and now since we've started running live events, that's what's happening. It's like, it'd be crazy if we could get Aussie Open. What do you know? We got Aussie Open. It'd be crazy if we get Robbie Eagles. What do you know? We got Robbie Eagles. So every time we have like a crazy idea and I don't reckon this will work, it usually tends to pay off in spades. So the sky is the absolute limit when it comes to what's next.
Fab. And you mentioned during the Deathmatch tournament, I mean, it sounds like a really obvious question, but you must be so excited for that and what it's going to bring to both the company and to Aussie indie wrestling and hopefully to that wider audience as well.
Yeah, like it's not trendy to run a deathmatch tournament in the middle of winter. Obviously, our winter is the US's summer, so we're kind of tacking on to the end of their summer, even though we're on the other side of the world. But it's so exciting for so many people. Like for example, like Mad Dog. Who's celebrating 21 years in wrestling this year and has been doing death matches since day one. Like this is kind of a thank you, a thank you letter to Mad Dog for everything that he's done for Australian wrestling over the last 2 decades. Vixen, same boat. And then, young talent like Callan Butcher and Atlas Whitaker and Will Walker and people like that who are kind of just dipping their toes in and realizing that this, death match isn't the outlaw mud show or the organized barbarism. It's actually a respected subgenre of pro wrestling around the world, and hey, this might be my thing. And watching their eyes light up as they start to work stuff out is super, super cool and super humbling as well. So internally, we're all very, very excited about it. It'd be nice if my garage could stop filling up with light tubes. That'd be really good. I think we're at like 1,000 and counting, and I've still got a couple more deliveries before the show. So It'd be nice if that stopped happening. But yeah, internally we're really excited, and hopefully externally everybody is too.
And you picked up on a couple of things there that I want to mention. The first is to do with the light tubes, because obviously I think people think deathmatch, they automatically think the light tubes. How do you then make sure that it stays fresh, deathmatch after deathmatch after deathmatch? Each one's individual, each one's different, and has their own personality.
Context is important. Like why we're doing them. It's hard being a brand new company. Not everyone can dive headlong into blood feuds. We need to establish our characters before we have them conflict. But the other side of it is, like, I lean to a very Japanese style booking philosophy, like I said, which is why you haven't seen any scrambles or triple threat matches. Like, it's either singles, tag, trios, or tomicos kind of stuff. So that's where that ethos comes from. But also with that ethos is structured death matches. It's not like some companies it's not a bad thing. It's just how they choose to do it. But like I've always liked this is a barbed wire board and cinder block deathmatch. These are the implements that they have to play with, laid out in advance, and let's see how creative and violent they can get with the implements used. The show that we were going to do on the 17th of July was going to not have any glass.
Right.
So, like we can show variety and still do a show with 4 death matches and no glass. However, obviously that didn't happen. But yeah, it's about setting the expectations early, not just going, this is a death match. And there's, a bunch of light tubes and a pane of glass and barbed wire. I like getting creative with them, coming up with silly ideas, like that last drinks death match with Charlie Evans was just a random concoction. I went, if we were going to fight, we'd probably be fighting in a bar. Okay, how does that translate into a deathmatch setting? Okay, well, let's have a beer pong pane of glass. That makes sense. Let's have, a little cocktail station with, lemons and limes and stuff. And then you taking those implements and using them in the context of the deathmatch. So the creative side of it, I really, really enjoy. Like, eventually, the shine will come off the apple of, okay, I've seen light tubes pop before. But, we try not to do 3 or 4 light tube matches on every show. Like, with the exception of the deathmatch tournament, we try to only do, 1, maybe 2 matches a card that have glass in them, just so we aren't, beating a dead horse.
Yeah.
But, there will come a time, but by then, we will have established our characters and established our narrative, and then the reason why these matches are happening are going to become a lot more prevalent, and the emotional connection will be there, as opposed to the physical spectacle. At least that's what I hope.
No, perfectly said. Yeah, I totally follow. That's fantastic. And sort of leading on from that, you mentioned obviously it as a subgenre of wrestling as well, like you mentioned. So what would you say to I guess the wrestling purists who are like, oh, deathmatch isn't wrestling, or like extreme wrestling isn't wrestling?
All your favorite wrestlers bleed is what I say to them. Look, I understand the naysayers of deathmatch wrestling because largely it's the bad death matches that get picked up by the naysayers, and they use it to point. But we could do the same with bad comedy wrestling, or bad lucha libre, or bad technical wrestling, where it looks like 2 people rolling around inside a sleeping bag. Bad subgenres of wrestling, regardless of what they are, can be harmful to the business as a whole. Good subgenres of wrestling, whatever they may be, can be incredibly profitable and amenable to the genre as a whole. It's about like so many people go, it's just garbage wrestling and fat guys stabbing each other with them. To a point, that's true, but if you isolate yourself and have the tunnel vision where that's all you think deathmatch wrestling is, you're missing out on some amazing wrestling. Do you know what I mean? You're missing out on Spring Breaks, the biggest independent show in the world, which is headlined by a death match between, Nick Gage and Ricky Shane Page, who are having an amazing wrestling match, telling an amazing story, going back to that thing where wrestling is just a vehicle to tell stories, with all the props and all the carnage around them. They'd have an amazing match and tell an amazing story without those. Because they're both, incredible performers. I don't know why you would, close your eyes and sit there and put your fingers in your ears and kick and scream about something that you haven't tried to understand. If you try to understand it and go, hey, it's not for me, that's fine, but you're probably not going to sit there and chirp about it.
No, absolutely. And as yourself, personally, you picked up on it as well. You're someone who's in the ring and you're behind the scenes at DMDU as well. How tough is it to, I guess, both to balance that and to make sure, you're not sort of pushing yourself too far on either end?
Burnout is real. I'll be honest. Like, there's been a couple of times where I've had to go to management. Like, I need a break for a few days because I'm cooked. Usually around when things like lockdowns and stuff happen, it's just a big emotional overload because you do pour so much energy into trying to make a show come together, and then when it goes tits up, like 24 to 48 hours out, due to something completely out of your hands, is really upsetting. But I try to balance it as best I can. I've been doing so. I got injured a few years ago and was on the shelf for 3 or 4 years, cumulatively. And in that time, I learned a lot more back of house stuff with another promotion that I was working for here in Melbourne, through kind of their period of exponential growth. So being able to manage a team and delegate a lot of stuff. There's 150 jobs that need to be done on show day. Realistically, 135 of them can be done by somebody who isn't me. I just need to explain to somebody how to do it, and then check that their work is done, as opposed to me, wasting all this time on something when my time could be used better elsewhere. I've been really lucky on the other side of that my opponents have understood that I wear several hats. But it's also good to know that the other, members of management, whether they're performing it, earlier in the show or they're not performing at all, can kind of, think of it like a soundboard. Like, in the week leading into the show, my promoter soundboard might be switch might be all the way up. But then on show day, I may pull that back and push the wrestler forward a little bit more and focus more on the match. But, I try and speak to my opponents the week of and go, hey, this is like, what do you want to do? Let's get some ideas down, because realistically, you're only going to get me for about half an hour before we go out there. We'll touch base during the day, but you're not going to have my undivided attention until right beforehand. And it seems to be working. The deathmatch tournament will be interesting, but again, there's other members of management who aren't performing in the deathmatch tournament, so they can kind of take the reins whilst the members of management that are performing can focus on the task at hand. So it's a delicate balance, and when we get it right, it all works really well, and when we get it wrong, someone has a panic attack. But that's why there's multiple members of management. Thank goodness, and it's not just one person.
Yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned, with something interesting I want to pick up on is when you mentioned saying to your opponents, oh, you might only be able to get me like 30 minutes before a match. Is it, again, a little bittersweet in the fact that you're sort of behind the desk, you're working the event, but maybe you don't then get to go back into the locker room with the guys and girls and have a bit of banter and a chat and all that sort of thing, while the event's going on?
Yes and no. We pride ourselves on our locker room culture. We have, everyone on my shows, or our shows, sorry, I would consider friends. Some of my best friends in the world. So I get to catch up with them during the day when they turn up. Big hug. How have you been? It's good to see you. How's the wife and kids? How's the husband? All that kind of stuff. And that banter goes on throughout the day. The one thing I wish I could do more is when I come back from my match, sit down and relax and have a chat with my opponent and be like, that was cool, and just kind of like ride that euphoric wave for a little bit. But usually I'll come back and be like, okay, cool, give me a t-shirt. I'm off to the merchandise table, try and sell some t-shirts. And then, okay, what needs to be done now? Right, are the cues for the next half of the show done? Does the ring crew need coordinating? Who's setting up the main event deathmatch? It gets cut from all the feeds, but a lot of the time the death matches are being set up not by the ring crew but by the other wrestlers on the show, just because we do trust each other so much. And when using props in death matches and weapons in death matches, there is such a high degree of risk. You don't want to half-ass train someone who doesn't really understand the consequences of getting it wrong on how to prepare everything. So a lot of the times, like that 100 light shoe match we had on our debut event, that was set up by 3 or 4 of the wrestlers on the show. So we ran a video package and we all just slid in and just went, all right, let's get this set up. Is everything safe and honky-dory? Okay, cool, let's go. And then, when it comes time for myself to do a big death match, it's the exact same. So we have a great community there to kind of make sure that no one's doing too much of the heavy lifting. But it would be nice to sit down and have a bit more of a chat with the talent and stuff like that. But it's great because everyone there's my friends and family. I'm really lucky. She's out in the lounge room at the moment, but my wife's the color commentator. You know what I mean? I get to work with the love of my life every month, so I couldn't be happier.
Yeah, I was
with with the bond I've got with everyone.
I was going to say, I've I saw that on your Twitter as well. You mentioned that with about your wife being the commentator and things like that, and you mentioned the camaraderie there. I want to ask about the not just maybe the pre-match or the during the show, but what about the post-show? Do you guys all like go out and like have a drink or have a laugh after the show, or does everyone sort of go their separate ways?
There is a crew, like we try and so we cater all of our events. Again, like, and it's a sore topic, but the We the Independent movement was not lost here. Hopefully somebody else picks up in their stead because it was doing good things for the wrestling industry. And before it all went tits up, for very good reason, mind you, but before it all went tits up, I'd spoken with them about, the things that they were trying to implement as standards across the UK, and just little things like making sure there's a medic on site, sure there's catering, all that kind of stuff. So we kind of took that, and again, with the blessing of the pandemic, had the time to run with it. So we have a treatment team. We have a trained myotherapist and a strength and conditioning coach, and a paramedic on site at all times. So wrestlers actually getting help warming up and warming down. We have, healthy meals in a microwave. So if you want to eat straight after your match, because I know a lot of talent don't eat during the day of a show, and we put, a couple of cartons of beer on for the talent as well. So it's not necessarily everyone likes to go out for a drink, but sometimes it takes a minute to clear the locker room after the show because everyone's just sitting around and having a good time. And because we have such a diverse roster, not just from here in Melbourne, but when the borders are open domestically, we have wrestlers from interstate and stuff. Everyone's just hanging around and catching up. Just with their friends who we happen to all perform together in this amazing art form. So it's a super, super cool atmosphere. And, and then they'll come out and mingle with the fans and chat and take photos and just bullshit because, we as a country were in lockdown for such a long time and we're all checking in on each other. So the Australian wrestling community is so tight-knit. It's really amazing.
And how important is that? Because, I'm not going to name promotions, but we've spoken to some wrestlers already here on Grapple Theory, about, the promotions they like to wrestle in and the ones that they feel most at home in. And there are certain ones that always crop up with every wrestler. These are the places that we really like. How important is that the wrestlers feel like they're not just coming to work, they're coming in and they can have a chat with their friends and they can hang out and that it feels like home to them, like you mentioned with the correct medical staff or with food or with just those little things?
Crucial. In a word, crucial. It's, like I said, if we're doing something as crazy as death matches, we want to make sure that we come correct in every single other aspect of our business. But we just want everyone to feel safe, whether it's fans and safeguarding them. We have a whistleblower phone number posted around the venue. If a fan is acting inappropriately or offensively, you can text them, say, hey, this fan that's sitting in this chair is being obnoxious. And the situation will be taken care of by management and security. So safeguarding the fans, safeguarding, the talent as well, making sure that everyone just feels safe and welcome is something that we, more so than saying, hey, we're the first deathmatch company in Australia. We're a company where people come to work and feel safe. People come as fans and feel safe. That's what we hang our hat on most.
And you mentioned earlier speaking out and things that developed from that, and obviously it was while it was heartbreaking and devastating to read all these things, it was something that I think needed to happen in wrestling. All this needed to come out because fans, wrestlers needed to know it was going on. But how important is it? You mentioned the measures that you guys put in place and the way you want to run the company, which is fantastic. But do you think whether it's Australia, America, UK, do you think that wrestling can get better, can heal, can improve, and can show that it's learned from all this tragedy that's happened?
Yes, but it's not going to be popular for a little while. There are wrestling promotions in every pocket of the globe that are doing things the right way. And it may not be the popular way right now, but over time and as generations come and generations go, the young generation that help with our ring and do our dark matches, we want to show them that this is what wrestling can be in this country. In terms of, talent care and wellness and fan care and wellness. We can do this. Yes, it costs money, but it's not hard. Like, why wouldn't you try and make a safe space for everyone? We're all fucking nerds that like wrestling. why would you not want to support that and kind of make that a safe space for everyone to come and geek out together over this stupid thing that we've all liked since we were kids? I don't know many people that got into wrestling in their mid-20s. Everyone got into it as a kid and, still look at it through rose-tinted glasses even now. So, yeah, I think it can get better, but it's going to take work, and it's going to take a few people doing the unpopular thing every now and again to make that happen. But, yeah, a rising tide floats all boats. We're really lucky here to have an independent scene that looks out for each other on all levels. Do you know what I mean? Like, if companies have to cancel due to lockdown, for an example, the other promotions will go, hey, look, this really sucks for these guys. If you can afford it, don't ask for a refund. Let them roll the ticket into the next show. Make sure that they can keep your money and use it to keep the company afloat. Buy their T-shirts, watch their shows on streaming services. We're all trying to get through this pandemic and this new era of wrestling together. And it's something like I'm super proud of as someone who's been in wrestling for so long, because it wasn't like that when I started. I think the same can be said for the rest of the world. I definitely think it can be done, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later. And from what I can tell, the right people are in the right spots to make that happen.
No, perfectly put. And something else I read on your website that really intrigued me that I wanted to pick up on was you make it very clear on the DMDU website that you acknowledge that the land that you're wrestling on is the land that was owned by the people who lived in Australia before. How important was that? Why was that so important for you to make so clear?
So to give you some context, I'm an Indigenous Australian.
Okay.
So the Black Lives Matter movement hit me like a sledgehammer, and was directly involved in it, and actually created some really good conversations. And actually on the turnbuckle, I try not to put over other podcasts, but on a podcast, they did a really amazing Indigenous roundtable with 4 Indigenous wrestlers. 3 indigenous wrestlers and a Singaporean Australian performer about racism in wrestling in Australia and what we can do to make it better, and started having these conversations. Australia was colonized, over 200 years ago by the British. I hold no ill will, but I dealt with a lot of racism when I started wrestling.
Sure.
Both from fans and from other performers. And when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, like all of our management team in one way or another were involved in the protests. There were protests here that shut down the city in the middle of a pandemic, mind you. So it was one of those things where we went, that it doesn't cost any money to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we get to perform on, and try and have, an inclusive roster and have some people of color and stuff like that on it when we can. Sadly, there isn't a lot of Indigenous wrestlers, even less in Victoria. But it doesn't hurt, and we it doesn't always make the live cut, but we do an acknowledgement of country verbally at the start of every show as well. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. And in other states in Australia, and it goes back to Melbourne being such a progressive city, in other states in Australia, that statement gets booed.
Really?
Yeah, like racism is still alive and well in certain parts of Australia.
Wow.
That statement here gets silence and cheers. Do you know what I mean? Everyone listens to it and understands that it's a focal point of our promotion. And you're right, we do make a big deal of it on the website. It's the first thing that comes up before you get into the website. It means a lot to me as a performer and as a human being. So I'm very proud to be doing that. And we push other promotions to, hey, do an acknowledgement of country. If I wrestle on other companies' cards, I go, are you doing an acknowledgement of country tonight? Oh, we don't really know how. Look, I'm happy to write it for you. This means a lot to a lot of people, and it's starting. Those winds of change. So if I don't mind taking the time and writing them for every company, if we have to. But it's just that first, like you said, that first step of recovering and getting better after all these things that have happened. Wrestling can be that safe and inclusive space for everybody. It just takes work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Congratulations. I think it's awesome that it's done, and it's it's great that it gets such a good reception where you guys are. And hopefully over time it will become that, in the rest of Australia as well, like you say.
Well, the thing that's blown me away, and I've only noticed it in the last couple of weeks, just monitoring social media. We put pronouns in our lower third graphics, because we do have some people, who identify differently to their cisgender on our cards. We've started to see other companies doing that now. That we've not even really even heard of, like some independent companies in like the Northeast and in the United States and stuff like that, going, it's really cool to see, such and such company putting gender pronouns in. We're not doing this for clout. Like it means a lot to the people who it directly affects. But then having, punters, whether it's domestically or even in the US, going, shout out to DMDU because they did it as well, or they did it first. Like I said, it's that splashing of water in your face when you go, holy shit, like all of our crazy ideas and all this stuff that means a lot to us that we think may not mean a lot to other people is obviously starting to rub off on the right people. And it's companies like that, where we'll start to see that change.
Yeah, and it must be like so heartening, aside from all the events you put on, to know that, like you say, the pronouns and these statements that you're putting out, again, like you mentioned, it costs no money to do. It's just, but it means so much to those people that it affects. And it must be so heartening to know that other companies are then following suit and continuing that and seeing how important it is.
Constantly blows me away. So I keep using the word blessed. Like I'm so constantly spellbound at this is my life now. You know what I mean? I get to do all these cool things and work with all these cool people. I get to do it with the love of my life by my side. But people that I've watched on TV for 20 years, I can now call my peers. Not necessarily bonding over our love of wrestling, but over trying to make wrestling a better place. And we sit there and we'll brainstorm over ideas in terms of inclusivity or events that can help benefit a particular subgenre or class of people. That kind of stuff like blows me away. And when you said but when burnout is a real thing, that's the thing that keeps you going, because you want to keep trying to make change for the better.
Fab. Well, Joel, I obviously really appreciate you joining me on this. We've just got one final segment that we do with every guest that we have on, which is called the matches that shaped my life. And obviously, at the minute, we've only talked to just wrestlers, so I'm going to amend a couple of questions just for yourself as a promoter and wrestler now.
Not a problem.
But let's start with the first match I remember watching.
Goldberg beating Hogan in the Georgia Dome.
That was your first match?
Yeah, my uncle had Optus Vision, which is really outdated cable for anyone from Australia who's listening. And I was at his house on a Tuesday afternoon during the school holidays, during the summer break, and saw Goldberg beat Hogan in the Georgia Dome.
That's a cracking first match. That is amazing. Similarly, it might be the same one, it might not. The match that made me want to be a wrestler.
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's not the popular answer, but Chris Benoit versus Bret Hart from WCW.
You were a WCW guy growing up.
Yeah, well, because one cable package had WCW and the other cable package had WWF.
Right.
And the cable package that I had WCW. I didn't get into WWF until WCW almost folded.
Someone asks me, what's wrestling? What do you show them?
What's wrestling? What do I show them?
No,
I'm pretty good at reading my target audience, but at the moment I'll show them either Megumi Kudo versus Combat Toyota from FMW, or I'll show them. It's kind of tough because like you want crowds there. Ricky Shane Page versus Nick Gage from Run Ricky Run.
Nice. Next one is my first match was.
I wrestled a gentleman by the name of Mark Montana in a converted factory in front of 8 people on a Sunday afternoon. And I wore tracksuit pants, runners, and a FUBU t-shirt.
Incredible. I mean, we ask everyone their first match, and no one has even like taken a second to think about it. Is that something that really always sticks with you, the first match you have?
I remember the match pretty well, all things considered. It was a lot of fun because I trained for like 2 years before I had my first match. And I remember trying to do the Cactus Jack elbow off the apron while he was on the announce table and falling really short and slamming my hip on the floor. I remember a good amount about that match, but it was a lot of fun. Mark Montana is one of the classic gimmicks. Like old Australian wrestling. So
Right.
it's kind of cool to be able to give Monty a shout out every now and again.
Brilliant. This next one is, you sort of picked up on it earlier, so I'm interested to know now that you're put on the spot if you say the same thing. The best match I've ever had.
It's myself and Charlie Evans.
Yeah. Why that match?
It was genuinely emotional for both of us. It was something we both wanted to do, and like I said, it exceeded our lofty expectations. A close tied second is myself and Atlas Whitaker from the month after, and a tag team cage match between myself and Judd Newman, who sadly is no longer with us, versus Xavier Black and Nick Eclipse. It was we got to headline it was like a tag team hardcore match for an all cage show, and we got to headline for the tag titles for that company at the time, and everything was going right that night, and I played buckets. But it's just one of those really cool memories that I'll never forget.
Amazing. One I'm going to throw in there that we obviously don't normally have is going to be similar. The best match I've ever seen, not involving yourself, at DMDU.
Richie Taylor versus Charlie Evans.
Yeah. She appears a lot
100%.
in what you say. You really got like a big backing for her in what she does.
When Charlie Evans realizes how good that she is, the world is her oyster. The only person who doesn't think that she's one of the best in the world is her.
Really?
100%.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I agree. Like, I haven't seen her on the indies. She's fantastic, and every match she has is just great. Yeah,
and constantly pushing not only themselves, but everybody that they're associated with to do better. The thing that I'm the most excited about is you'll start to see in the next 6 to 12 months her first batch of students out of the House of Free Fighting in Newcastle start to come through, and then you'll really see just how good she is.
Really? Is she one of the ones that, like you mentioned when I asked you about, the ones to watch, is she one of the wrestlers you'd say she can make $1 million?
Charlie Evans?
Yeah.
Any day of the week.
Amazing. And I'm sure she'd be delighted to hear you say that as well. I'm sure you've told her as well.
I tell her all the time. Like I said, the only person who doesn't believe she's fucking excellent is her. And I tell her all the time. I said, you know how fucking good you are, right? She's like, yeah.
Right. Amazing. Well, hopefully she'll watch this and she'll see you say it again.
I hope so.
But so the next one would be in my dream match to be in. Not necessarily at the MDU, just anywhere. What would your dream match be?
6-man tag exploding barbed wire match.
With?
Myself. All right. Let's see. The with is the tough one. But I'm going to go myself, Charlie Evans, and Alex Colon against Matt Tremont, Nick Gage, and Atsushi Onita.
Yeah, that would be a hell of a contest. Brilliant. And the final one, not necessarily a match, doesn't have to be a match, can be anything else outside of that. Your favorite wrestling moment?
Ooh. It constantly changes, to be honest with you. My favorite wrestling moment. One Night Stand 2005.
Yes, cracking.
Having been put on the spot, and if you asked me tomorrow, the answer would be different. But as of right now, and the wrestling I watched this week, because I just love those genuine white hot crowd reactions. You know, like Lawler showing up at the ECW arena, or Ricky Shane Page debuting in Game Changer.
Yeah.
You know, those kind of genuine holy shit moments is what I love. And I watched One Night Stand the other night on the couch with my wife, so that's what's in my head at the moment. So let's go with that for today.
And the last one is almost going on from what you mentioned. It's a new one. We don't normally have this question, but I'm thinking of adding it to the list. I'll see what you say and see how it goes. But it's the biggest pop I've ever heard.
Ooh. Biggest pop I've ever heard? Okada popping up on the screen at MCW.
Really?
Slex came out and challenged any member of New Japan on night 1 of this tournament, and night 2, Okada answered the challenge and literally almost blew the doors off the joint. And then the corresponding match the month after, but going from being a small but very popular indie to holy shit, we have the IWGP champion here in the space of 30 days is a moment I'll never forget as long as I live.
It's like you say, those moments in wrestling are just incredible, aren't they? When you know that the pop is genuine, when the roof has legit come off because no one's expecting it.
Yeah, it was nuts. And then, yeah, the month later, when you hear the coin drop and his music hit, and everyone in the building just lost their fucking mind.
Amazing. Joel, thanks so much for coming on and speaking to me. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you taking the time out. And, congratulations with everything you guys are doing. I think it's fantastic. And, I caught you guys on Twitter again because I follow Charlie Evans from, being a fan of her on the indies. And she's always retweeting your stuff. And I was like, oh, I got to check these guys out. And I did. And, yeah, the product you're putting out is fantastic. Great work with everything. And all the best for the future. I guess the thing...
That means the world.
No, well, you're doing great and keep it up. And, if I am ever able to come out to Australia, I'm not a huge fan of flying, but if I can ever brave it out, then I'll make sure to come and check you guys out. But, yeah, I guess my closing thing would be for anyone watching this, would be what's your promo for DMDU? Why is DMDU the place to check out if you're a wrestling fan?
If you're a wrestling fan, come and watch Deathmatch Downunder because you get to see a country that is legitimately upside down from wherever you're watching. Put on some really fucking good professional wrestling, whatever you like, whether it's comedy wrestling, lucha libre, strong style, big people smacking the dog shit out of each other, or death matches. We've got pretty much all of it. We're accessible through IWTV. If you don't have an IWTV account, you should, but if you don't, you can use the code DMDU, which gives a little bit of a kickback to us, and it shows that we have passionate wrestling fans that are willing to spend money on stuff they care about. We're available through IWTV. Our entire back catalogue is up there, and we are happy to interact with fans all over the world on social media. So please give us a look. I promise you won't regret it.
Joel, thanks again so much. Really appreciate it, and best of luck with everything you've got going forward. And I'm sure we'll be in touch, and I'll let you know when this goes out as well.
Please do. We'll definitely be in touch, and hopefully we can catch up and do this in person.
Amazing. Yeah, that would be lovely. Love that. Thanks so much. Have a great evening.
You too, man.
Cheers. Thank you much. Bye.